It's an alternate 1945, and despite Mustache Man succeeding in his grand bid to subjugate Eastern Europe, he has not yet achieved his ambitions. This timeline diverged from our history, when the British had decided to negotiate a peace after the disaster at Dunkirk, rather than resolving it to fight until the bitter end. This early peace gave Mustache Man and his ideology an unprecedented rise of legitimacy, his state, stability, and time to prepare the largest invasion in human history, Operation Barbarossa. While the Soviet Union may have been more prepared for this attack, and despite their bitter resistance, the lack of a secondary front to manage led to the Germans ultimately occupying all of Eastern Europe up until the Ural Mountains. However, once the Dunkirk Treaty had meant to be renewed, the British refused to continue to abide by its stipulations, cutting off its war reparations and refusing to continue to align with the Germans. This should have resulted in an immediate reprisal, but as news of the American secret weapon, the nuclear bomb, had reached Germany, as well as their guarantees of Britain's sovereignty, Mustache Man had instead resolved to bide his time, saving any future confrontations with the West for when he has his own secret weapons to deploy. Mustache Man's attempts to return to the years of appeasement had destroyed secret promises that he had made with Yes Man's Italy, who soon fell into a civil war between pro- and anti-German fashionistas. With this sign of weakness in the Germans' European system, the Americans have been eager to respond. But how will the West deal with this still fashionable no man? What will happen to all of the Italian Empire's Balkan gains? Could German fashion adapt so quickly to their new geopolitical reality? And could the German system even survive a Cold War? Welcome to part 3 of Project Germania, LoreDad's take on an Axis victory scenario. This project has been a long time in the making, since I want to do things right. A part of what made it so difficult is that German fashion ideologically is so barbaric that the idea it can be translated into a reasonable Cold War scenario is difficult. That, and it's a surprise that they would even win the World War in the first place. Possible History has great videos on the topic. You can check it out in the link above. Thank you to Possible History for collaborating with me on part 1 and 2 of Germania. And thank you all for waiting so patiently for me to continue this series. But let's not wait any longer. It's time to dive into Project Germania. With the legitimacy of the Italian government being split between those who are loyal to the de facto head of state, Yes Man, and those loyal to the de jure head of state, the king, Victor Emmanuel III, the Montenegrin, Albanian, and Greek protectorates would face their own power struggles immediately following the outbreak of the Civil War. Most notably, Greece would have a very different fate than in our history, due to the fact that in this timeline, when Taxis's government would have complied with the demands of the Axis and joined the alliance, instead of refusing like our history, a communist insurrection would happen during the invasion of the Soviet Union. So this timeline's Axis invasion of Greece would be perceived as a reorganization rather than an occupation. The territories that the Italians, including their Albanian protectorate, and the Bulgarians would be granted to them, but the question remains, what could have happened to the rest of the Greek territories? The Greek communist insurgency would be so strong that the monarchy would need to evacuate. But after the Axis would have restored order in the state, they would have refused to reinstate the old monarchy, as they would have decided to flee to the British-controlled territories rather than direct Axis members such as Italy, Bulgaria, or Germany. Instead, the title of King of Greece could be claimed by the Italian King Emmanuel III, formally integrating Greece into the Italian Empire via personal union. This claiming of the kingdom means that when the Italian Empire falls to a civil war, the Greek territories would be loyal to their head of state, the King of Italy. While they may be under personal union with the monarchy, the Italians still had directly annexed many majority Greek lands, so their compliance with the regime is definitely shaky. We'll explore the result of this Italo-Greek situation at a later point. For now, we must observe the results of the Italian collapse. In our timeline, after the Italians had capitulated to the Allies, the Germans had quickly moved in to solidify their control over the formerly Italian acquisitions in the Balkans. In this timeline, they would manage to quickly seize the Italian-annexed Adriatic ports, but the question of who should gain these territories would be a point of contention between themselves and the Croatian puppet. The Croatian Free State was a German-Italian condominium puppet state, with very little autonomy, so much so that despite the local fashion being anti-monarch, they were forced to appoint an Italian king, who never even moved in. This is because the Germans and Italians both found Croatian fashion to be way too extreme. Could you imagine the Germans being concerned about how non-YouTube terms of service you are when they had planned to and were actively participating in non-terms of service actions across an entire third of the continent? It's for this reason that I believe the Germans, when marching into the region to establish order, would ensure that the Italian acquisitions in places such as Zara would remain nominally under Italian rule with heavy German presence, rather than being granted to Croatia. While Croatian claims of this land would be valid for many historical reasons, their strategic importance to Germany would be vital. Now that their primary Adriatic ally had suddenly fallen to a civil war, the Germans needed to be able to make sure that these future naval bases were theirs. That, and if the Croatian fashionistas had taken their lands, they wouldn't be particularly nice to the Italians there. When the Croatian leaders would protest this, the Germans had postponed the solution to this conflict until after the situation in Italy had been resolved. This lack of freedom for the free state of Croatia would begin to delegitimize the local fashion movement, especially when they overthrew the monarchy that they had just recently instated. The collapse of the Italian Empire, the instability in both Croatia and Greece, and the collapse of the Italian Protectorate of Montenegro would lead to an insurgency that could destroy Axis dominion over the Balkans. In our timeline, the Montenegrin Protectorate had some regional collaborators who sought to re-establish an independent Montenegro. They were known as the Greens. This had even been supported by the Queen of Italy, who was the daughter of the last reigning king of Montenegro. However, Italy under Yes Man had continuously pushed the issue back, and instead annexed regions of Montenegro to Italy, or the Protectorate of Albania. Therefore, I believe that the Greens would quickly overtake the local administration and begin attempts to prepare for their king's arrival. Seeing as the monarchy had such close ties to Montenegro, and that by supporting an independent Montenegro, they compromised more of the Social Republic's territories, the Italian kingdom would recognize the Kingdom of Montenegro as independent, seeking their aid against the Social Republic, who occupied the rightful territory of the Bay of Kotor. While the Germans could simply invade Montenegro, they would avoid getting directly involved by supporting Chetnik insurgencies in the area. However, by doing so, they would ultimately fall to communists. Due to the lack of popularity of the Greens, seeing as they were Italian collaborators, Chetniks loyal to the exiled king of Yugoslavia and communist Yugoslavs would overtake Montenegro. However, soon after the United Front had achieved their goal, the Yugoslavian communists would purge the Chetniks, seeing as the organization had many ties to the Axis already, with half of them being active collaborators with the German puppet government in Serbia. Unbeknownst to this plot, these legal Chetniks who collaborated with Germany would become the primary faction as compared to the illegal Chetniks who were loyal to the Yugoslav king. While the fall of Montenegro to communists is not the ideal outcome of the situation, it has set up a scenario where Germany is able to turn this Montenegrin conflict into a separate proxy conflict from the Italian War, as well as bolster the collaboration government in Serbia's legitimacy and stability. In our timeline, the Serbian government of national redemption was established by Germany following their occupation of Yugoslavia. This government was barely recognized internationally, even Germany itself, who was so focused on this ideology of German superiority that they barely wished to acknowledge Serbian nationhood, only dealing with them to grant significant autonomy to the local Germans in Banat. The government was incredibly flimsy, with nearly every suggestion to improve its stability ignored by the Germans. However, in this timeline, the neglected puppet of Serbia would become the Reich's main tool against the Montenegrin communists. While many in fashionable Germany couldn't care less for the struggles of the Serbians, the threat of a communist insurgency in the Balkans pulling more of their stretched thin resources away from the higher priority objectives like pacifying the East could give the Americans the confidence they need to escalate the conflict and destroy the Reich. The German diplomat stationed in Belgrade, Hermann Neubacher, had, after the fall of the Italians in our history, suggested that the German occupation of Montenegro be granted to Serbia to form a greater Serbian federation. In this timeline, he would suggest the same solution to Mustache Man, who would accept in order to gain as much local support for the conflict as possible. Therefore, despite Milan Nedic's protests, the government of national reclamation would form a united front with the Chetniks and stage an invasion of Montenegro to destroy the communists there. With the Serbian National Republic finally getting the support it needed, it would soon march into Albania, who also suffered a communist insurrection, further escalating the Balkan conflict to include Bulgaria, who had marched to reclaim the rest of Macedonia. In response to Germany's political maneuvering, the United States would begin covertly supporting the communist Yugoslavians, including sending undercover agents to inspire insurgencies in Serbia, Croatia, and Bulgaria, ultimately spreading out the proxy conflicts to all of Europe. This direct attack on Germany's natural sphere of influence had showed the first cracks in an, up until this point, dominant state who had never struggled in any of its conflicts. What would be giving them so much trouble when they had so handily defeated their enemies before? Germany had cemented its future forever. The sacrifices of their soldiers in taming the East had all been worth it. Soon, these lands, ripe for settlement, would benefit the German people forevermore, and ensure that this Reich would last 1,000 years. These loud and proud proclamations by the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda would soon begin to sound like cries of desperation, as the supposed benefits of the conquest of the East had still been an extreme burden on the metropolitan Germans. Those who eagerly supported the total war for the future of the German Volk have, so soon after peace was supposedly ensured, been slowly informed of the United States' interference in Germany's natural sphere of influence. Of course, this means there would be yet another total war for their future to be truthfully secured. But how many more times will Germans need to be sent into these endless wars? And what are the rumors of the United States developing weapons so strong that they destroy entire cities? Due to the struggles of Operation Barbarossa, with its heavy casualty toll, as well as the standing armies needed to properly tame the Wild East, the looting economy of the German Reich was brought to a standstill. While their occupations and annexations of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Yugoslavia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and all of European Russia had been ripe for looting and plundering by the German populace, they no longer had any nations to loot. While the German High Command was eager to invade the United Kingdom, Mustache Man had held off, worrying about the result of the United States responding with nuclear strikes. And now, with the proxy conflicts in Italy and the Balkans, more resources would need to be sent to secure their position. But why would they waste their resources in elevating E-tier peoples like the Serbians to nationhood in their new order? The once united multi-factional Reich was now in utter disarray, suffering ideological crises that tore their legitimacy apart. Surely, the revered Führer would be able to rein in these factions and stay true to the ideological principle of one people, one state, one leader. Well, in our history and in this alternate timeline, Mustache Man's health was in rapid decline. Early signs of Parkinson's, slurred speech, limps, bipolar ravings, and more had caused many a problem for the regime in the last years of its life. However, in this timeline, they had, for a brief moment, been the uncontested European hegemon. Despite the clear taunting from the USA with their support of the defection of the British and the stirrings of disloyalty of France, Mustache Man had somehow decided the correct decision, to not engage in open conflict. This inconsistency may be implausible, but it's the only way that a Cold War of ideologies of the fashionable Germans can be had. In order to address this inconsistency, we'll have the architect of the Reich, who we'll refer to as the architect, as Mustache Man's closest advisor. In some Axis victory scenarios, most famously the New Order, the architect is seen as someone who has the rationale to, if given the opportunity through uncontested leadership, reform the dysfunctional mess of the Reich into a modern superpower. This would also be no doubt fueled by the misinformation he conveyed in his memoirs. However, if we take away the rose-tinted glasses, he certainly deserves the negative treatment and branding as one of the worst humans to live. Through his rational and technocratic vision, he ensured the enslavement of millions of non-Germans to forced labor, and fought until the very end to keep the German Reich whole. While he might be a terrible person, the truth is that he had the guts to be able to refute Mustache Man's decrees, such as the Nero Decree, where Mustache Man had demanded that all infrastructure and industry that was due to be occupied by the encroaching Soviets to be destroyed. And at the very least, it admitted some of his atrocities in the Nuremberg trials, where others were cowardly enough to feign amnesia or claim that they were absolved of guilt for just following orders. Therefore, in order for this timeline to even be slightly possible, we require for the architect to be in a position of high influence. Despite the mental deterioration of his leader, the architect would help convince Mustache Man to play the diplomatic game. This would suit and empower the other realists like the former wine merchant and Diet Nietzsche himself, but would sideline and anger the ideological purists of the electricians and the old guard militarists like Meyer. While this policy of playing purely diplomatically had started to allow for cracks in the Germans' world order to show, it had also given those who sought to reform the Reich the ability to argue their cases. While they would never bring this up to the man himself, many would confide with the architect to begin plots of a new foundation. While these whispers would not manifest into anything yet, there was still the matter of the Reich's economy. They needed some form of reprieve for their currently still loot-based economy, while the East was being pacified, and needed a solid economy to continue to fund their nuclear program, which would be working desperately to uncover the secrets of the nuclear bomb. And while Yes Man had been refusing such support from the Germans for fears of their independence being stifled further, the electricians and military advisors from the old guard would soon begin their plots to permanently align the Social Republic with the Reich. And soon, a development in the war in Italy would transform the soon-to-resolve civil war into a proxy conflict that would either make or break the Germans' world order. With a limited, yet significant supporting coming in for the Reich following their territorial concessions, Yes Man was able to begin a second march on Rome, where he would be able to properly cement his leadership. In a political event which repeats the events in 1922, but with far more bloodshed, the Italian Social Republic would lay siege to Rome, with the monarchy fleeing to Napoli. In order to preserve their regime, it was clear to them that a major change in foreign policy had to be made, lest the Italians are permanently fated to shine the boot to the Germans. Thus, the monarchy would begin talks with the Americans. Their conditions were simple. If you banned fashion entirely from your parliament, as well as denounced the territorial gains you had made under fashion's rule, the Americans would provide support for your regime. While a difficult decision to make, the monarchy would comply, with the only caveat that no man be allowed to stay if he changed his clothes. Despite the system following Yes Man's kowtow to the Germans, he would accept the ultimatum of the Americans, rebranding his fashion to a purely nationalistic one, with of course American genes. Soon, the war which would have been a trounce for the fashionistas of Yes Man became a long and grueling conflict. Flying fortresses would begin to soar in the sky and rain down on the collaborators. With the purge of No Man's faction, the fashionable party, several covert informants were exposed, further emboldening the monarchy, and the previously apprehensive Greek puppet government had quickly announced their ambitions to align directly with the Kingdom of Italy and return their rightful king back to his throne in Athens. With this decisive move by the Americans, the Germans have been put into check. A peace must be sacrificed, else the stubborn king move his position to avoid capture. But what move will they make? How will Yes Man react to his so close political victory being voided? How will the Germans react to the Italian kingdom's reconcessions of territories back to the French state? Will this concession of territory inspire the loose collaborators to demand the Germans return their occupied territories? How will the intense resistance of the Yugoslavian communists contribute to the rising tensions between the two great powers? And how will these events in the Balkans influence Germany's policy in the East, if at all? All these questions and more will be answered in Part 4 of Project Germania, which will come out when it's ready. And that's Project Germania Part 3. Thank you all so much for being patient with me as I worked on it. Researching for this project, as well as outlining and writing several drafts about this bleak world, was incredibly depressing. It's for this reason that I cannot ensure that a Part 4 will come out anytime soon, or at all. While my previous projects have always been episodic and weekly to bi-weekly uploads, I don't have the capacity to do that. Instead, I'll be sprinkling in more fun, less complicated videos between potential future uploads of this series. If you'd like to see more Project Germania, please let me know by leaving a like or a comment on this video. Engagement with my channel really helps it grow, so thank you very much for your consideration. Shout out to Grud, Jubs, Louis Avant, Cindy Beatty, and Seeking Sentience for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good day.